Committee on Homeland Security, Subcommittee on Counterterrorism, and Intelligence will come to order. Without objection, the subcommittee may recess at any point. The purpose of this hearing is to examine, unfortunately, the growing threat of anti-Semitism within the United States, particularly as it relates to the circumstances surrounding the killing of Israeli embassy staff in Washington, D.C., as well as assessing the current counterterrorism measures in addressing the threat of anti-Semitic violence targeting Jewish Americans and foreign diplomats on U.S. soil. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. I want to thank my colleagues, I want to thank our witnesses, and all who have joined us for today's important hearing on a deeply troubling and persistent issue, one that strikes at the very core of our national values. We convene today in the shadow of a deeply unsettling trend, the continuing rise in anti-Semitic attacks across the United States. This alarming pattern has been brought into sharp and painful focus by the recent incidents in Washington, D.C., Boulder, Colorado, and unfortunately many other events. Here in our nation's capital, just a few blocks away from where we sit right now, 2 young and innocent lives were taken in a brutal attack at the Capitol Jewish Museum following an event for young Jewish professionals. In Boulder, Colorado, several individuals were severely injured in a horrific act of violence during a peaceful demonstration meant to highlight the plight of Israeli hostages still being held by Hamas. Most recently, anti-ICE rioters in Los Angeles, and in fact many other cities, have attacked federal agents, torching streets, defacing property, and assaulting officers for enforcing the law. An attack on our very core of law and order that is related to the subject that we are talking about today. In Paramount, agents deployed tear gas and flashbangs to disperse violent mob. President Trump has responded decisively, sending National Guard troops to restore order and protect the public. Instead of standing with law enforcement to protect communities, Governor Newsom dismissed the deployment, downplaying violence altogether. And this reckless refusal to acknowledge the severity of the crisis undermines public safety and sends a message that lawlessness will be tolerated in certain places throughout our country. Last week, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula released a video calling for attacks on U.S. soil, specifically targeting government officials, specifically targeting members of Congress. Companies tied to the war in Gaza and Jewish institutions were also called for with violent attacks. The group's leader even cited recent attacks here in D.C. as examples to follow. This should be a chilling reminder. Anti-Semitic, might we say, anti-Jewish hate is not only rising, it's being weaponized by foreign terrorist organizations and inspiring violence right here in our homeland. These incidents are not isolated. They reflect a broader and deeply troubling surge in anti-Semitic rhetoric and violence, both online and in our neighborhoods. As the numbers continue to rise, fear has taken hold in many Jewish communities nationwide. For the 4th consecutive year, anti-Semitic incidents have increased in all 50 states. This is not a localized problem, it's a national crisis. We cannot talk about national security without addressing the policies that allowed this environment to take root. When President Trump took office in January, we quickly saw the truth. What we had been told for 4 years, that our hands were tied by current laws, was a lie. We didn't need more legislation. We needed leadership that was willing to secure the border and enforce laws that were already in existence. And while this new leadership led to historic lows in illegal border crossings, the danger we now face comes not from those trying to get in, but from those that are already here. For 4 years, the Biden administration opened the floodgates, allowing millions to pour across our border unchecked. Among them are individuals who now exploit weak immigration enforcement and thrive in a system that refuses to apply existing laws in certain communities, laws that were meant to protect us from exactly this kind of hate and violence. Last year, right here on this committee, I confronted Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas about these very dangers. I warned about people already living among us, people who had been radicalized, emboldened, and driven to hate. And today, we are seeing this threat materialize right before our eyes. These heinous acts of hatred are not only attacks on individual lives, they are assaults on the very principles of religious freedom, safety, and security that form the foundation of our democracy. What's worse, this hatred is not confined to dark corners of the internet or lone extremists. It is now showing up in our institutions, in places that should be safe and inclusive. Our schools and our universities have become breeding grounds for anti-Semitism. Jewish students are being harassed, intimidated, and in some cases physically attacked, often with little to no response from university leadership. This is a fact. This is happening. Literally dozens of people have reached out to my office, people that I don't know, that I have never met, that have said that this is happening. And nothing has been done at some of these universities and institutions. This failure to act is not neutrality. It is complicity. Let me be absolutely clear that anyone who refuses to call out these hate-filled actors, who fails to condemn their vile actions loudly and unequivocally, is no longer a bystander. They are complicit. Silence and apathy in the face of anti-Semitism is not neutrality. It is permission to continue to act that way. And it enables the hate to spread and the violence to escalate. We will no longer tolerate cowardice or indifference when Jewish lives are under threat. The Jewish community has long been a vibrant and integral part of the nation's fabric, yet today too many Jewish Americans are now living with an ever-present fear for their families, their institutions, and their future simply because of who they are and what they believe. This hearing is an opportunity to confront the threat head-on. It is a chance to hear directly from Jewish leaders, from law enforcement officials, and community experts on the front lines, and to ask ourselves and to determine what more Congress and our government can do to respond effectively and prevent this type of behavior from continuing to grow in this country. President Trump has issued a vital executive order to combat anti-Semitism on college campuses and to protect Jewish students. Yet despite these steps, widespread harassment of Jewish students at dozens of universities has persisted. Whether it means improving how we track and report hate crimes, investing in stronger security for at-risk communities, or expanding education to dispel anti-Semitic myths, one thing is clear: action is not optional, it's imperative. Our purpose today is clear: to understand the root causes of this rise in anti-Semitic violence, to hold accountable those who would perpetrate and enable it, and to strengthen our response to protect vulnerable communities that should not be vulnerable or subjected to this kind of fear, threat of violence, and might I say, terrorism. We must examine how we can all work together to confront hate and build resilience. This hearing is a call to action to reaffirm that hatred and bigotry have no place in America, and to ensure that every citizen can live without fear of discrimination or violence. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses, from our experts, and working together with colleagues on this committee to forge a path that promotes safety, justice, and unity. My hope today is that those that serve on this committee, regardless of party affiliation, will boldly condemn the actions that have led to violence against the Jewish community, the actions that just a couple of short weeks ago took the lives of two young, innocent Americans, the actions that have threatened our communities in places like Boulder, Colorado. One thing is going to be absolutely clear today. There is no room for anti-Semitism in the United States of America. Not in Washington, not in Boulder, nowhere. And we will know today where this committee stands. This committee was formed in the wake of 9/11 as a result of the most horrific terrorist attack that our nation has suffered. And we have to get a grip right now in this committee on what continues to drive those that would perpetrate this violence inside the United States. We have to understand and also recognize that there are people that were let into this country over the last 4 years that have a tie to radical groups like Al-Qaeda, like ISIS, and that still affiliate with these groups and are prone to radicalization and do want to do harm to many communities, including our Jewish community. I want to thank the witnesses for being with us this morning. And I yield back, and I will now yield to the ranking member, the gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Magaziner, for his opening statement.
Thank you to the chair for calling this important hearing, and I thank our witnesses for being here today. I want to begin by honoring the memories of Yaron Lachinsky and Sarah Milgram, who were senselessly killed last month following the American Jewish Committee's annual Young Diplomats reception here in Washington. They were a young couple who had their whole lives ahead of them, including a planned engagement. And I know that every member of this subcommittee extends our deepest condolences to their families and friends. We also grieve for the victims of the horrific attack in Boulder, Colorado, who had Molotov cocktails thrown at them while walking in support of hostages held by Hamas. Both of these incidents were anti-Semitic terrorism, and we must clearly call them out for what they are. We must condemn them. The same is true in the arson attack on Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro's home a few weeks ago. According to the Anti-Defamation League, in 2024, there were nearly 10,000 reported anti-Semitic incidents across the United States, a 5% increase from 2023 and the highest number on record since the ADL began tracking anti-Semitic incidents 46 years ago. Anti-Semitism exists throughout our society. It can be found on the left, on the right, in the middle, and it must be called out everywhere. But while it is true that Jews in America face the threat of anti-Semitic violence throughout our country, it is also true that the Jewish people have friends and supporters throughout our country. In the year 1790, President George Washington visited the Touro Synagogue in my home state in Newport, Rhode Island, and prayed with the local Jewish congregation to demonstrate his wish that America would be a country welcoming of all faiths, and specifically the Jewish faith. Now, this is personal for me as well. As the son of a Jewish father and a Catholic mother, I have family who were driven out of their home countries due to anti-Semitic violence. I have experienced personally, as have other members of my family, anti-Semitic harassment here in the United States. It is a daily fact of life, unfortunately. And I am concerned about our government's ability to counter the rise of anti-Semitic violence. I want to make sure that our government is doing everything that it can to stamp this out and to keep people safe. That is why I am concerned that President Trump has fired staff across the federal government who were tasked with investigating cases of violent anti-Semitism and other forms of hate, including over 100 employees at the DHS Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, tasked with investigating and stamping out violent anti-Semitism and other domestic violent extremism. Some 250 attorneys, about 70% of the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division, and at least 240 staff at the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights. Let's be clear, anti-Semitism on college campuses is a real problem that must be dealt with. The way you deal with that is by strong oversight from the Department of Education, including the Office for Civil Rights, which has been gutted, not by cutting off funding for medical research. President Trump recently installed Thomas Fugate to serve as the director of DHS's Center for Prevention Programs and Partnerships. For those of you who don't know, this is the office that is tasked with partnering with local law enforcement, nonprofit organizations, churches, synagogues, private sector organizations to prevent hate-driven violence. Mr. Fugate is a 22-year-old who just graduated college with no counterterrorism, national security, or law enforcement experience. I bring this up not to be partisan because, again, there is anti-Semitism on all sides of the political spectrum. Believe me, I know that. But I genuinely am concerned that this sends a signal about how serious the administration actually is in doing the work of stamping out anti-Semitic hate and violence. Words are nice, but actions are important, and personnel is important as well. If the administration takes combating violent extremism seriously, why put this man in charge of the office tasked with preventing domestic violent extremism? We need an answer to that. People want to know. We also want to know why the FBI has transferred agents and intelligence analysts out of the domestic terrorism section and canceled the development of a national domestic terrorism incident database. Again, the policies matter. And I hope that this will be an opportunity for us to course correct and to surge resources toward those agencies that are tasked with stamping out domestic violent extremism, including anti-Semitic violence. We should be surging resources to those agencies, not gutting them. And it is a tragedy that it has taken the deaths of 2 innocent people and the severe injuries of a dozen others to remind some people of the importance of cracking down on domestic violent extremism, including anti-Semitic violence in this country. We should be increasing the federal government's focus on preventing violent extremism, not cutting funds and not shifting personnel away from those efforts. I hope in light of these terrible events that the administration will reconsider, shift resources, and put the very best people in charge of the agencies tasked with doing this important work. I hope we can use this hearing as an opportunity to hear from our expert witnesses on how the federal government can disrupt the surge in violent anti-Semitic extremism that we have seen since October 7th, and stop the normalization of anti-Semitism and enhance the safety of the Jewish community in our country. We cannot lose anyone else to anti-Semitic hate. Full stop. I thank our witnesses again. I look forward to hearing from you, and I yield back.
I thank the ranking member. Other members of the committee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record, and I'm now pleased to introduce 4 distinguished witnesses before us on this very topic, but I first ask that they rise and please raise their right hands. You solemnly swear that the testimony you will give before the Committee on Homeland Security, the United States House of Representatives, will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Thank you. The record reflects that the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. I'd now like to formally introduce them. Mr. Kerry Sleeper currently serves as Deputy Director of Intelligence and Information Sharing at Secure Community Network. In this role, he coordinates with DHS, FBI, and many other governmental and non-governmental agencies to provide a 24/7 coverage for SCN's National Jewish Operations Command Center. Mr. Orrin Siegel serves as Senior Vice President of Counterterrorism and Intelligence at the Anti-Defamation League and oversees the Center on Extremism, the Center for Technology and Society, and law enforcement teams. Dr. James Carafano is a leading expert in national security and foreign policy challenges and has previously served as the Heritage Foundation's Vice President of Foreign and Defense Policy Studies. And finally, Ms. Julie Raymond is the Senior Vice President of Policy and Political Affairs at the American Jewish Committee. She has helped launch the Bipartisan Task Force for Anti-Semitism, the Congressional Caucus on Black-Jewish Relations, and the Congressional Hellenic-Israel Alliance. Again, thank you to all the witnesses. I will now recognize you in order. We have your written statements, and we appreciate those. If you can please summarize those in 5 minutes, and there is a clock to alert you of the timing. Mr. Sleeper, you are now recognized for your opening statement.
Dear Chairman Pfluger, Ranking Member Magaziner, and members of the subcommittee, thank you. My name is Kerry Sleeper, and I currently serve as the Secure Community Network's Deputy Director of Intelligence and Information Sharing. I oversee SCN's 24/7 Jewish Security Operations Command Center and lead our intelligence coordination efforts with federal, state, and local law enforcement, as well as with our Jewish communal security partners. I sincerely appreciate your invitation to testify on this critical matter. America's Jewish community is under attack, and we need to take decisive action to save lives and mitigate the escalating threats. The threat of targeted violence being faced by the Jewish community is complex and continues to evolve. This threat will likely persist for several years. As recently as last week, our analysts have observed a notable increase from foreign terrorist organizations, aligned media that appears to be doubling down on calls for attacks in the U.S. and Jewish targets. These groups appear to be coordinating efforts and amplifying shared narratives to encourage these acts of violence. These groups are evidently trying to take advantage of the morbid appeal of the recent attacks in D.C. and Boulder by violent extremists to incite followers to commit additional violent acts in retribution for the ongoing war in Gaza. These violent trends are fueled by a persistent ecosystem of anti-Israeli networks operating in the U.S. and online. Groups such as the Students for Justice in Palestine, Within Our Lifetime, Unity of Fields, and online propaganda hubs such as the emerging IS-NAD network consistently amplify messaging aligned with foreign terrorist organizations and Iranian-backed information operations. While not all are directly tied to designated foreign terrorist organizations, they help blur the lines between protest and incitement, justifying, glorifying, and promoting violence against the Jewish Israeli community in the name of Gaza. Now I'd like to briefly describe how SCN manages threats against the Jewish Israeli community. Our analysts work tirelessly to identify, analyze, and communicate threats to life directed to the Jewish community found online. Threats to life are defined as threats to kill or maim a victim, with the perpetrator being assessed to have the intent and capability to carry out the threat. Our analysts utilize state-of-the-art technology and keyword algorithms to search the surface, deep, and dark web for threats specifically targeting the Jewish community. Last year, our analysts identified approximately 500 threats to life that they shared with the FBI's National Threat Operations Center. This year, SCN is on track to surpass 700 threats to life, a 40% increase, reflecting both the rising threat environment and the operational demand placed on our analysts and infrastructure. Even these efforts illustrate only a portion of the threats facing the Jewish community. Following the 21st May shooting outside the Capitol Jewish Museum in D.C., SCN analysts identified approximately 6,000 violent threats targeting the Jewish community posted on social media in just a one-week period of time. SCN has issued strategic warnings for over a year that the war in Gaza would have serious domestic implications, including a surge in anti-Israeli, anti-Jewish, and anti-Semitic attacks, many of which have now materialized as our analysts had warned. Our analysts assessed that as the conflict continued, Jewish and Israeli communities in the U.S. would face elevated threats from pro-Palestinian or anti-Israeli violent extremists. Over the past 20 months, every analytic brief SCN has produced has warned of this rising threat, exacerbated by online incitement from Iranian-linked groups and designated foreign terrorist organizations, including Hamas, Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda, and ISIS, which have promoted and justified violence against Jewish civilians globally under the banner of retaliation for Israel's military action in Gaza. If our adversaries are coordinating their actions, so must we. We are long overdue for a national strategy to specifically combat targeted violence against the Jewish community. To date, our community's front line for defense against these acts have been nonprofit organizations like the one you see in front of you, including Jewish communal security organizations. And while we have done a remarkable job in identifying threats and to protect our communities, facilities, and people, we need to recognize that we have nonprofits operating on donations who are defending against foreign terrorist organizations and incitement and extremist groups who are constantly pounding the drumbeat of kill the Jews. Today's threat to the Jewish community requires a clearly defined national strategy that identifies and leverages resources from federal, state, and local governments, as well as Jewish communal security organizations and groups like you see in front of it today. We have seen numerous instances of groups adversarial to the Jewish community posting planned documents on how to attack our community. It's time we had a plan to protect our community. I would respectfully suggest that this committee, with your focus on intelligence and counterterrorism and your demonstrated interest in protecting the Jewish Israeli community, would well be positioned to drive the development of a national strategy. Finally, this is the appropriate forum to thank the FBI, fusion centers, and our state and local law enforcement partners across the nation for their unwavering support and constant vigilance in protecting the Jewish community in these perilous times. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sleeper. I now recognize Mr. Siegel for his opening statement.
Chairman Pfluger, Ranking Member Magaziner, distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Oren Siegel, and I serve as Senior Vice President of Counter-Extremism and Intelligence at ADL. My team works to track, expose, and disrupt extremism, anti-Semitism, and hate every single day across the ideological spectrum, online, and on the ground. I'm here today because the Jewish community in this country is not just facing elevated threat, but one of the most diverse and complex threat landscapes in recent memory. We have experienced a surge in violent anti-Semitic attacks, included calculated, mission-driven violence. In the past 12 months, ADL has documented 9 terror plots or attacks in the US motivated by anti-Semitism, more than the previous 4 years and a half combined. 3 weeks ago, a young couple was murdered outside the Capitol Jewish Museum here in Washington, D.C. The suspect, who reportedly shouted "Free Palestine" after the attack, posted a manifesto rejecting nonviolence. 10 days ago in Boulder, an attacker also shouted "Free Palestine" at a peaceful vigil while attempting to burn his victims alive with Molotov cocktails and a flamethrower. My team also uncovered videos posted on Telegram recorded by the suspect in Boulder before the attack, in which he declared that God is greater than the Zionists, greater than America. And 2 months ago, Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro's home was targeted by a firebomb on the night of his Passover Seder. Each one of these horrific incidents was an attack on the entire Jewish community. And as if that's not bad enough, these attacks have been justified, celebrated, and normalized by groups operating on American soil, as well as across digital platforms. They fuel an environment where targeted attacks against the Jewish community become increasingly likely. While the grievances driving the violence are often framed as opposition to Israel, they frequently include expressions dehumanizing Jews and Zionists. And they also include support for terror groups. When Jews are blamed for the policies of the state of Israel, it's not only anti-Semitic, it is dangerous. And let me be crystal clear, criticism of Israel or its policies is not anti-Semitism. Mere criticism does not factor into our data. But when Jewish individuals and institutions are targeted with protest, vandalism, harassment, and violence, that is classic anti-Semitism. And that type of hate has been a driving force behind the surge of incidents we have documented in the US, especially since the October 7th massacre by Hamas. In 2024, ADL documented over 9,000 anti-Semitic incidents of assault, vandalism, and harassment, the highest number we have recorded in 45 years of tracking. And for the first time, the majority of those incidents referenced Israel or Zionism. On campuses and in cities around the country, we've seen flags of terrorist organizations alongside slogans calling for globalizing the Intifada or bringing the war home. Online platforms like Telegram, among others, enable foreign terrorist organizations to share and promote their propaganda to thousands across the US and around the globe. Groups like Samidun, Unity of Fields, and even some Students for Justice in Palestine chapters have crossed a dangerous line, amplifying terrorist propaganda. And some of those groups are even supported by fiscal sponsors with little oversight. The time to act is now, and Congress should take the following 5 steps. Increase funding for the Nonprofit Security Grant Program to protect at-risk houses of worship, schools, and community centers. Invest in community-based violence prevention, such as DHS's CP3. Empower the Interagency Task Force to combat anti-Semitism, ensuring it has a mandate and resources to coordinate across federal agencies. Pass the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act and the Holocaust Education and Anti-Semitism Lessons Act to strengthen the accountability in our education system. And finally, address hate on our digital platforms by enforcing transparency and cracking down on violations of material support laws. Despite years of warnings and mounting data, anti-Semitism and the violence that it animates continues to be dismissed, minimized, and politicized. Too many families are asking the ADL, is it safe to be Jewish in public? And while Jewish communities are strong and resilient, they cannot be expected to bear this burden alone. We need leaders to condemn anti-Semitism without hesitation. The federal government has the tools and the responsibility to act. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Siegel. The chair now recognizes Dr. Carafano for his opening statement.
Thank you. I want to thank the committee for addressing this vital issue. And I have a statement for the record, which I will super briefly summarize, and it starts with a really big confession. I sadly have many, many decades of experience in the national security, homeland security, and counterterrorism space to draw on. And so when I was asked for this hearing, I just started with one very simple question. So from that perspective of what's worked and hasn't worked over decades, and if your goal is to reduce the threats of terrorism in the United States and enhance public safety, what are the single most important things you could possibly do? And I boil it down to one on this issue, and that is to focus on the Venn diagram, on the nexus of activities between violent action and the planning and organization and support of execution that enable and make them possible, and that is principally material support. I have a number of recommendations for the record, but I just want to focus on what I think are the 2 really important buckets, that if we get nothing right in this between the Congress and the administration, that these are the ones that they have to get right. And the first one is you have to put maximum effort into the investigatory actions of material support and related criminal activity like RICO crimes and organized support for public violence at the federal, state, and local level. And the real sweet spot is connecting the 3 of those together to maximize the benefits of each of them. And so I would point out, for example, something like the 287G program, which Congress enacted, which was originally designed for state and local cooperation with federal law enforcement. But in the initial, when this program was first introduced, many of the law enforcement agencies that participated in it were actually focusing on counterterrorism. And Florida, for example, was a great innovator and advocate of this. So it is a perfect program to illustrate how you can bring those resources and authorities together to really expand your investigatory actions. And I think what the committee has to ask is are there other areas we can expand this in, not just in terms of immigration enforcement, and not just in the DOJ space, but in the Homeland space and under the authorities of Homeland Security and possibly in other areas as well, commerce, treasury, and so on. The second area is cutting one of the most vital sinews in the connection between material support and violent action, and that is terrorist travel. Everybody remembers the 9/11 report. Very few people remember that the 9/11 Commission considered terrorist travel such a vitally important task that they wrote a whole separate volume just on that. And so I think any of the range of activities which are really designed to thwart malicious travel and presence and entry in the United States are extremely efficacious in helping diminish the capacity to provide material support and reducing the likelihood of terrorist actions. So border and immigration enforcement, deportations, denial and revocation of visas. I think all of these are absolutely critical support for this. And I just want to end by thanking the committee for having this hearing and taking this mission on, because truly you are doing God's work. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Carafano. The chair now recognizes Ms. Raymond for her opening statement.
You hear me?
Now you're on.
Now I'm on. Okay. I appreciate the opportunity to be a part of today's very important conversation, and I'm grateful for your bipartisan leadership in addressing the anti-Semitism crisis in our country. Much has been said about the tragic murders of Sarah Milgram and Yaron Lashinsky, so I just want to take this opportunity to say, because they were cherished friends of AJC, and because they were murdered outside of an AJC event, to again extend condolences to their families and to thank the Secure Communities Network for the extreme amount of support and assistance that we've received from SCN since that incident happened, as well as before. That attack, as well as the one that followed in Boulder, simply occurred because their attackers considered all of those who support Israel's existence, and perhaps even all Jews, to be proxies of the Jewish state. As we see horrific acts of violence being committed under the guise of resistance, it's clear that a disturbing and increasing number of people consider all Jews to be responsible for Israel's actions and to somehow, therefore, be deserving targets of hate, discrimination, and violence. Ongoing investigations into these attacks will reveal how or whether the perpetrators engaged with or were inspired by terrorist or anti-Israel extremist groups. Such groups pose a real and rising threat to Jews' safety at home and abroad, and their capacity to incite and facilitate violence transcends borders. Groups like Samadun, which the Treasury Department sanctioned last year for channeling funds to the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, carried out a theatrical performance cosplaying the October 7 attack as recently as this last weekend in Brussels. At the same time, while terror-linked groups are one driver of today's horrific situation, there are many threats facing Jews that are not directly or indirectly attributable to them. AJC's State of Anti-Semitism in America report in 2024 found that an equal number of American Jews believe that the political right and the political left represent an equal anti-Semitic threat in the United States today. Whether from the political right, from the political left, from Christian nationalism or extremism in the name of Islam, all threats to Jews' safety and security demand a robust government response. There is no question that terror and material support for terror are illegal. Breaking the law, violating the rights of others are not legitimate forms of protest, full stop. These activities must be addressed using the full weight of the law. However, I also want to be clear. As we seek to counter these harmful behaviors, we have to adhere to the guarantees of free speech and due process that apply to all people in the United States. While anti-Semitic and anti-Israel rhetoric and violent anti-Semitic attacks pose extremely serious challenges, they must be addressed with different approaches. Speech, no matter how offensive, is protected. Suppressing it doesn't just violate our American values and responsibilities, it allows those who are advocating hate to be cast as victims. Your leadership in this is vital. Public leaders on both sides of the aisle have an obligation to respond promptly and strongly. Ambiguity is unacceptable. The message must always be that nothing, absolutely nothing, including events in the Middle East, can justify anti-Semitism. Leaders must categorically reject calls to globalize the Intifada or resistance by any means necessary, because while some are protesting, others are planning. In addition to strong, specific, and public condemnation, there are other critical ways that Congress can act. The exorbitant amounts doled out for Jewish communal security are, in effect, a Jewish tax. Congress should provide at least $500 million for the Nonprofit Security Grant Program administered by FEMA, which has been underfunded for years, and support the Center for Prevention Programs and Partnerships, CP3, which strengthens our country's ability to prevent violent and terrorist activities. These programs and other anti-terrorism grant programs must be appropriately resourced and staffed. To address anti-Semitism online, Congress needs to pass fundamental reforms to Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act and press social media platforms to enforce and strengthen their own policies that relate to anti-terrorism and incitement to violence. There is also a real and urgent need for the government to adopt a broader, comprehensive strategy to counter anti-Semitism and foster American Jewish life. Congressional advocacy in favor of a national action plan and a point person to lead interagency coordination can make an important difference in making this happen. It is only by addressing anti-Semitism holistically, regardless of political or ideological source and inclusive of both anti-Semitic rhetoric and violent attacks, that we can counter this surging anti-Semitism, which I think we can all agree is not just a problem that faces American Jews, but affects American society and democracy as a whole. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Raymond. Members will now be recognized in order of seniority for 5 minutes of questioning, and we may elect to do an additional round of questioning. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. And I appreciate hearing from everyone, especially hearing about free speech. And Ms. Raymond, your comments are, you're absolutely right that we have to protect free speech, that we have to be able to express views, in no matter whether we agree with them or not, and then acknowledge that there's a line. So what I want to ask, because it was mentioned by Mr. Siegel, is, so Mr. Siegel, I'll start with you. When somebody at a protest says free Palestine, how does the Jewish community receive that?
Context is always the key with any slogan, and that includes chants of free Palestine. I think, in many protests, if some in the community hear that, they don't really think twice about it. But I think if free Palestine is used to write graffiti on a sukkah or a Jewish institution, that's a very different context.
Is that a call to violence?
Free Palestine inherently is not calling for violence on its own, but if it's being yelled at when somebody's trying to burn people alive, you could bet it is.
Okay, do Jewish students in a rally that seems to be heating up in a way that is trending towards what could be physical violence, when somebody screams free Palestine with a Palestinian flag, is that received by Jewish students on universities as a rally cry for violence?
Yeah, I mean, even thought amongst Jewish students is not monolithic. I think different students may take it in a different way. I think what is important to focus on is when those types of sentiments or slogans are used when targeting specifically Jewish students or other individuals elsewhere. That's the context that is really troubling about that.
Dr. Carafano, what is, in your opinion, a rally or a free Palestine cry at a protest mean to the Jewish community?
Right. So I agree that context is everything, and I think one of the things that we focus on is it is a difference. I think if you are a U.S. citizen in a context of exercising your legitimate free speech, and in the sense if you are here on a visa as a student or as a professional, and you are promoting extremist ideas in the United States, you're a guest of the United States. In the U.S., it's very clear under U.S. legal authority that if you violate the terms of your stay in the United States, you should be removed from the United States. If you want to come to the United States and you have a track record of extremist violent statements that the U.S. government thinks disqualifies you from entering the United States, you should be denied entry to the United States. I do think that those are really important distinctions.
And there's legislation that I am sponsoring and many others are supporting that gets at the heart of the overstay of those visas, especially those that would perpetrate those attacks. And Mr. Sleeper, when you think about the terrorist in the Boulder, Colorado event, what was this person's mindset? How did they become radicalized? How did they get to the position where they are espousing these foreign terrorist organization ideals and this viewpoint of anti-Semitic and violent action?
Thank you, sir. The commonality amongst all three events were that the perpetrators condoned their actions in the name of Gaza. They had all been consuming the same material, the same information. When you have 3 events, violent events, targeting the Jewish community within 8 weeks, and all 3 offenders say the same thing, use the same terminology, it's clear that there is a consistent message being conveyed, and that message is targeting the Jewish community, and it's being conveyed by everywhere from foreign terrorist organizations to nation-state actors like Iran. Their goal is to do whatever they can do to incite violence against the Jewish community.
Thank you. Ms. Raymond, should those on a visa studying at a university, participating in some sort of protest, so not American citizens, but those on a visa, should they be allowed to burn an American flag at a university?
I want to start off by saying...
And scream Free Palestine?
Yes, I want to start off by saying that to be in America as a resident, as a student, is a privilege. It is not a right. And for those who are not upholding our values or threatening the safety and security of Americans, there needs to be some process for consideration of removal. Burning an American flag, shouting Free Palestine are elements of that freedom of speech. And there are, as has been discussed before, a great many interpretations of what that means, of what those types of messages mean, right? For many who would say, for example, from the river to the sea, right? They're seeing that ignorantly as a synonymous for a free Palestine, right? But if you look at where the river is and where the sea is, and if in fact what they mean when they say that is that it is only for Palestinians and not for Jews, that's a very different message.
Thank you. And I'll come back to you. My time has expired, and I'll give you I'll yield to the ranking member, and also if you need an extra minute, we can do that.
Appreciate it. Thank you to the chair and to our witnesses for some very good testimony. I'll start with Mr. Siegel and your recommendations, which were very helpful. Your first one was expanding funding for the nonprofit security grant program. That resonates with me because I know in my district in Rhode Island, we have numerous synagogues, churches, schools, mosques that have utilized that program. This is a federal program that helps those religious and community-based organizations get the security upgrades that they need to keep people safe. Cameras, facial recognition, et cetera. As of yesterday, and I believe this is still the case, the Trump administration has still not awarded $210 million of nonprofit security grant funds from fiscal 24, and has also not even noticed the funding for fiscal 25, an additional $274 million for availability. So that's in total nearly $500 million that the administration is withholding in nonprofit security grant funds, to say nothing of the budget for next year that they've proposed, which is also inadequate. So can you just, help us out here? Part of our job as Congress, as members of Congress, is to hold the administration accountable and to make sure the administration is doing everything that it can to protect people from anti-Semitic violence in this country. Can you just speak some more about the importance of releasing these grant funds right away and why the administration needs to act immediately on it?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Attending an event at a Jewish museum or marching or walking peacefully to show solidarity with hostages, or walking to class, or even just walking down the street in Brooklyn should not be an act of courage. But that's where we are.
Yeah.
And so the community is feeling vulnerable. This is a crisis moment, and we need to rely on our leaders and the government to help protect communities when they are at most risk. And I think that's what we hope people will understand, and that these dollars are going to go not for superfluous issues, but to protect people so that they don't have to be courageous just to be publicly Jewish.
That's very well said. Thank you. And I'll just say again, I mean, I genuinely appreciate that the administration has stated that cracking down on anti-Semitism is a priority. It should be. But the actions need to follow the words. And a very basic action is to release the nearly $500 million that Congress has already appropriated for the nonprofit security grant program so that lives can be saved. Your second recommendation had to do with the CP3 program. Again, for people at home who may not be familiar, can you explain what that is and why it's important?
Yeah, the Center for Prevention Programs and Partnerships at DHS, the idea there is that it would help prevent mass casualty attacks and extremism, not just respond to it afterwards. And my sense is that based on some of the work that was done there, they helped save lives. You know, anti-Semitism is the lifeblood of many extremist movements, both domestically and globally. And so if we can push back against the narratives that we know animate people to violence at the earliest stages, the community will be safer. And that's what CP3 has the potential to do.
It's about preventing people from becoming radicalized, especially young, impressionable people. And if I could, just again, I mentioned this earlier, but this, again, is the agency that President Trump has appointed this individual to lead. Mr. Fugate, a 22-year-old who just graduated from college earlier this year with no law enforcement experience, no national security experience, no intelligence experience. So I think what a lot of us are wondering is why? Why, like, there are plenty of qualified people out there. Is this the best we can do? I think there are some who are speculating that it's because the administration intends to shut down the CP3 program entirely, and Mr. Fugate is there as a placeholder while it's wound down. It's from what I understand, there's been significant firings and layoffs at CP3, which would support that theory. But the answer is we don't know. Now, if this is some whiz kid who is qualified somehow to lead this important office, then I think we at least ought to get him in here to ask him some questions about what his vision and his plans are. And, you know, with the extra minute that the chair was kind enough to grant me, I'll just ask any of our witnesses, does anyone feel comfortable having an individual with Mr. Fugate's profile and experience leading an office like CP3, given the charged environment that we're in right now?
Yeah, look, I'd just like to say that if you look at the entire federal architecture in the 4 years that got us here, I think it was an abysmal failure.
Yeah, but I'm asking about who's in charge right now.
Well, that's the point, sir, because you have all these people who were charged with reducing anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism in this country. And for 4 years,
I'll
it
reclaim
just
my time.
went up.
I don't think that justifies, any of this justifies appointing a 22-year-old with no relevant experience to an agency charged with keeping us safe, an agency that the ADL has flagged in one of their top 5 recommendations as needing more support, not less.
So I think you've asked the wrong
I will
question.
yield back.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize the gentlelady from Georgia, Ms. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There is a unifying belief of the left, a hatred of America and Western civilization. Anti-Israel extremism is frequently part of a broader anti-Western sentiment. It's why so many of the protesters at the LA anti-ICE riots are flying Palestinian flags while burning the American flag, and why Isra Hirsi, the daughter of a congresswoman who sits on Foreign Affairs, Ilhan Omar, said on her Instagram last week, from LA to Rafah, there is one common oppressor, death to the colonial empire. She also drew this connection between ICE enforcement in LA and Israel's war against Hamas. For the left, everything can be reduced to white people oppressing brown people, whether it be a BLM riot, a pro-Palestinian encampment, or an attempt to impede ICE from enforcing federal immigration laws. These protests are all organized by the same professional left-wing activists whose intent is to cause as much civil unrest and chaos as possible. Elias Rodriguez, the man who shot and killed 2 Israeli embassy officials last month, was deeply involved in this far-left activist ecosystem. Mr. Carafano, what far-left groups was Elias Rodriguez involved with?
So you raise a really important point, which is why that the threat of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism in the United States is a bigger and broader problem, because when we look at the organizations which have supported and encouraged or discussed these—
I'm short on time, Mr. Carafano. What organizations?
So
was
this
he
is the
involved
Party of Socialism and Liberation.
Great.
Which has also been engaged in activities like BLM and other riots as well.
Now, would that be linked to Neville Ray Singham? Does that name ring a bell?
He is widely recognized as a major funder of the organization, and that's from Wikipedia. So,
Right. And just to go further on who Neville Ray Singham is, he's the son of a Sri Lankan immigrant and Cuban immigrant. But in 1974, he was investigated by the FBI for his ties to groups engaged against the United States interest. He was a member of a Maoist group. He's also said to be nearly a billionaire and gives his money frequently to left-wing organizations. He's even linked to the CCP. He currently lives and works in Shanghai. He shares office space with a Chinese propaganda firm focused on presenting a positive image of China to the global South. And in 2019, he started a consulting business with Chinese partners active in the propaganda apparatus of the CCP. He has provided significant funding to pro-China media outlets around the world, and he even married Jody Evans, the founder of Code Pink, in 2017. She used to be against China, but she's not anymore, and she's currently co-authoring a book titled China is Not Our Enemy. You know what's really interesting about this man is he uses the Goldman Sachs Philanthropy Fund. There's a lot of Americans invest their money with Goldman Sachs, but the Goldman Sachs Philanthropy Fund is a dark money clearinghouse to obscure his identity, Singham's identity, while facilitating the transfer of substantial sums to nonprofit. Things like the People's Forum, which received over $20 million from Singham through the Goldman Sachs Philanthropy Fund, organized anti-Israel protests across the country, and was heavily involved in the protests at Columbia and the takeover of Hamilton Mall. Singham also funds $20 million through the Goldman Sachs Philanthropy Group to the Justice and Education Fund, which provides money to pro-China media outlets around the world. And, just as you mentioned, the Party of Socialism and Liberation. That's the group that's organizing these lovely events happening in LA that Democrats call mostly peaceful, but the people in LA call fiery, violent, and call a war against America. He also funded, and unbelievably, the pro-Palestinian protests around the country and on campuses, and Elias Rodriguez, the man who killed the two young Israeli diplomats. Singham coordinated the anti-ICE LA protest. Again, this picture just can't be shown enough. And they have been coordinating these anti-ICE protests around the world, around the country. And more to come is what the Democrats tell us. Mr. Carafano, one last question. Do you believe China is funding the war against America?
There's a lot of activity in the public record that show Chinese money is flowing into many of these organizations which have been involved in planning and organizing and supporting these activities. Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Carafano. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlelady yields. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Goldman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a little rich to be lectured about anti-Semitism from somebody who could not even bring herself to vote yes on a anti-Semitism resolution that was supported by all but 2 members of the House of Representatives. But we are here, I think, for a very important purpose, and I do thank the chairman for raising this issue and calling this hearing. I was disappointed that the partisan accusations that somehow President Biden and his administration are responsible for the rise in anti-Semitism when President Biden issued the first national strategy to counter anti-Semitism, and nonprofit security grants and the funding for them significantly increased during the Biden administration. And now that we've had 3 very serious violent anti-Semitic incidents, the need for those nonprofit security grants is even greater. And I was certainly disappointed to see that the subcommittee on appropriations allotted only $305 million for nonprofit security grants, the same amount in fiscal year 23, before October 7th, before the dramatic rise in anti-Semitism, and before the violent events that have occurred over the last couple months. Ms. Raymond, you are here from the AJC, and one of those tragic violent events occurred at an AJC event. Could you just briefly, and obviously we express our condolences to you and the organization and the Israeli embassy, but can you describe what additional security measures AJC will now need to take after and as a result of the murders of Sarah and Yaron?
Thank you so much for the condolences and recognizing AJC's sort of unique place in this horrible anti-Semitic landscape that we're all navigating in this moment. There's, of course, an active investigation into what took place the night of the murder of Sarah and Yaron. So I can't comment too much on that, but I can say that we've been in very deep and many conversations with law enforcement, with the FBI, with the Secure Communities Network about protocols, and have been largely reassured that the existing protocols that AJC has in place for our events are parallel to what Jewish community organizations and advocacy organizations across the board are using, and that we have done everything.
I guess the question, if I could just interrupt, is
Please.
I'm assuming that after this event where there was terrible violence, that you're going to have to increase security.
Yes.
That will cost money, correct?
Yes. Yes.
And that is true for just about every single Jewish organization, whether it be a synagogue or a nonprofit like AJC.
Absolutely. And there becomes a point where questions have to be asked. Do we have a program? Do we go on a trip? Do we engage certain constituencies? Or is the security cost simply too high?
Yep, and I think that that's worth noting because last year alone, there were almost $1 billion of applications through the Nonprofit Security Grant Program. Obviously, there was about $450 million, so not all of them could be granted. What you're saying, and what certainly I've been told by many synagogues and Jewish organizations, is now that these extremist anti-Semitic protests that previously had been included intimidation, harassment, some assault, but had not crossed over the line to violence and murder as they now have, are going to have to increase security. And the federal program that provides funding for that security is the Nonprofit Security Grant Program. And if there were $1 billion of applications last year, we can only imagine how much more need there will be this year. And I certainly hope that the chairman, who I know cares very deeply about this issue, will encourage his colleagues on the Appropriations Committee and in leadership of the Republican Party to dramatically increase the $305 million. Many have been calling for at least $500 million, which I have also supported, and I know AJC has supported. And it is absolutely essential for the Jewish community that the nonprofit security grant funding be significantly increased from last year, not decreased. And I'm hoping we can work in a bipartisan way to do that, Mr. Chairman, because I know you do, and many of your colleagues on the other side of the aisle care very much about the Jewish community, and this is essential to the safety and security of the Jewish community. And I yield back.
Congressman, if I may, if we have just 1 second, I would only say that the Nonprofit Security Grant Program doesn't just help Jewish communities, protect our institutions. It's for all vulnerable communities. So as we're increasing this amount, we need to make sure also that it's not at the cost or at the jeopardy of other communities. So we need to not only elevate it to meet the needs of the Jewish community, but make sure that all vulnerable communities throughout the United States have the capacity to apply for and receive these important grants.
No question about it. Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, for holding this hearing. Of course, thank you to the witnesses for coming. And first and foremost, our hearts go out to the Jewish community for these attacks, and anti-Semitism must be condemned wherever it rears its ugly head, full stop. But we have to do more than that. The anti-Semitic terrorist attack that harmed Jewish advocates in Boulder, Colorado on June 1st happened 25 miles away from my house. And as we've talked about, not an isolated incident, but representative of the surge that we've heard about of anti-Semitism in Colorado and across the U.S. And unfortunately, per data from ADL, 2024 marked the highest number of recorded incidents of anti-Semitism in Colorado's history. We're now 9th in the nation. Anti-Semitism has no home in Colorado or the nation. And again, I'd like to thank the chairman and the ranking member for this hearing so that we can find solutions. I was an Army veteran of the global war on terror. I was a cop for over a decade in the Denver metro area. And so I know that one of the solutions is effective information sharing between federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies. In the case of the Boulder attack, there's several different nodes at which that attack might have been stopped when he was admitted entry into the United States, having previously made many anti-Semitic statements, when he illegally overstayed a visa, when he illegally attempted to purchase a firearm. Or again, the uploading anti-Semitic content to social media in support of extremists. Unfortunately, some of that coordination did not occur, and the attack was planned over the course of a year in our backyard. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter into the record and play for the committee just a very short video of some of the statements made by the Boulder perpetrator before he carried out the attack.
So ordered. And let's suspend the time until we can get the video. When the video starts, you can resume the time.
الله أكبر مما هو دونه فلما نخشى ما دونه ولا نخشى الله لا تنسوا الله أكبر لا تنسوا الله أكبر من كل شيء لا صهاينة ولا أمريكا ولا بريطانيا وفرنسا وألمانيا الله أحق أن نخشاه الله أحق أن نخشاه أمي زوجتي أولادي أخوتي أشهد أن الله ورسوله جاهدوا في سبيله أحب إلي منكم
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First question to Mr. Sleeper. In light of statements like that, overstaying a visa, trying to purchase a firearm, should that have raised some red flags?
Yes, knowing what we do regarding individuals who may be inclined to pursue the Jewish community, as a result of their grievances, yes, law enforcement, the intelligence community should be able to focus more acutely to identify issues that are suggesting an individual contemplating mobilization to violence.
Thank you. And then last question, I got a minute and 12 seconds left. You mentioned in your testimony fusion centers. How can federal policy strengthen the original mission of fusion centers by equipping them with the tools to detect and respond to these anti-Semitic or other terrorist threats? And what does that look like in terms of threat reporting?
Thank you. Fusion centers play an absolutely critical role in sharing threat information, timely threat information across our domestic intelligence architecture. SCN leverages fusion centers every day we work. When we identify a threat to life, we include fusion centers to ensure that there's redundancy in sharing that information. As we look ahead and we develop a strategy to mitigate targeted violent threats against the Jewish community, the intelligence component is absolutely essential. We need to understand what our adversaries are doing. Much of the discussions we're having today are defensive. What can we do to protect this? Until we get to the point of we understand what our adversaries are trying to do, what they're targeting, and incorporating the fusion centers, working in conjunction with the intelligence community, federal, state, and local law enforcement, then we will have a seamless perspective on information being shared specifically to this threat.
Yield back.
Gentleman yields. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Puerto Rico, Mr. Hernandez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I represent probably the largest Jewish community in the Caribbean, and I take the responsibility very seriously. Jewish people deserve to live without fear and with the full protection and support of their government. Anti-Semitism has no place in our society, and I stand firmly with the Jewish community and remain committed to confronting hate with strength and determination. Part of my commitment includes investigating and understanding how anti-Semitism spreads online, how it spreads through digital spaces like encrypted platforms such as WhatsApp and Signal, or social media platforms such as Facebook, X, Instagram, YouTube. And decisions by these companies, and full disclosure, I used to work for one of them, have an impact. We've seen how loosening content restrictions at Meta have led to an increase in anti-Semitism online. For example, a spike in anti-Semitic comments on the Facebook accounts of 30 Jewish members of Congress. Now, Ms. Raymond, while I disagree with the idea of reforming or changing Section 230, because I believe that Section 230 is what enables content moderation without liability, I think we can find some common ground with some minimum level of oversight, right, of moderation. Do you think that social media companies should reinstate previous policies around hate speech?
Social media companies have a lot of work to do, both in terms of reinstating previous policies, increasing the number of content moderators. There was a trend to have more humans monitoring social media and looking for problematic posts. That trend, unfortunately, is changing. And without the humans who are trained to understand what's going on, it's much harder to combat. With regard to Section 30, I would very respectively push back and give an example. You remember the attack in Paris on the Bataclan Theater in 2015, where 90 were killed. There were clear examples of how social media had inspired and allowed for that attack to be facilitated. An American was killed in that attack and sued the social media company. The initial court deemed that they were liable, but they could not be found guilty because of Section 230. So American lives are engendered because social media platforms cannot be held liable. No one's saying that they need to be liable for all of the hatred or all of the ridiculousness that exists on social media. That's what they're built for in a lot of ways. But there need to be some lines.
Yeah.
And when there's clear
I'm sorry
incitement-
to interrupt because I also have another topic that I want to move on to, but I do agree with the fact that we do need standards around content moderation. And I would be open to legislation at least requiring some auditing of whether those companies are enforcing those standards and their success rates.
Yes.
But I do think that we need to protect their intermediary liability status because it's crucial to protect freedom of expression and also for the platform's functioning. But naturally, we can continue this debate for eternity. And I agree with your point that online harm can lead to real-world harm, and that's something that we need to guard against. I'd like to switch over to the controversy surrounding Harvard and the limited time I have left. You know, I understand that there is much to be done by universities across the country to ensure that all their students feel safe on campus. But Harvard has implemented several initiatives to ensure that its Jewish and Israeli students feel supported and have a strong sense of belonging. And I disagree with the administration's decision to freeze over $2 billion in critical funding to a university known for groundbreaking research, and using the pretext of failing to address anti-Semitism on its campus is deeply misguided. My question is for Mr. Siegel. Given the ADL's partnership with Harvard to develop tools and best practices for combating anti-Semitism, can you share what measurable impact these initiatives have had so far in supporting Jewish and Israeli students on campus?
Well, I'll just start by saying, to effectively combat anti-Semitism, we need to safeguard those efforts from political exploitation. I would also say that, banning, foreign students from attending a university or removing their accreditation, that's not going to solve the anti-Semitism problem.
And I agree. I think we have to stand strongly against anti-Semitism, but we also have to stand strongly against weaponizing anti-Semitism for political gain. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. We will now enter a second round of questioning. Only those that were here for the first round will be allowed to ask a second question. If somebody new who was not here for the first round comes, then they'll be allowed to ask, but it'll be a single 5-minute period. The chair now recognizes myself for 5 additional minutes of questioning. Mr. Sleeper, you talked about the threat of future attacks, and you said that you're worried about the attacks, that SCN has predicted that there will be a rise. What about those? So we saw in the case of Boulder that this was a visa overstay issue. Are you worried about those that entered this country illegally that had a tie to terrorism? Could they also pose a threat?
Well, certainly if there's individuals in this country that have a tie to terrorist organizations, they should be a priority in monitoring. Ties to terrorist organizations, without a doubt. Yes, sir.
And do they pose a threat to the Jewish community?
If there's an individual in this country that has a tie to a terrorist organization, we should consider them a threat to the Jewish community.
Okay.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Dr. Carafano, when I think about the lawlessness that is happening across our country in many cities, talk to me about are these protesters in some cases being paid to go from city to city to protest, whether it is a from the river to the sea mindset or an anti-ICE mindset? Are there common threads that we see in these protests?
We do see organizations that have, in the public record, supported activities, including the BLM riots, the anti-Semitic riots that we've seen at universities and other places, and people in California. This is undeniable. Now, the question, as I said in my testimony, the key thing is material support. It's a real crime. It is a red line. Now, I'm not accusing anybody of having conducted material support, but the answer is, where do you look for material support? You look for people who are involved in activities that result in harm to the public, whether it's a terrorist act or a public violence.
So when you see communities that fail to take these protests seriously, when they do cross the line of protected speech to an area where it's not protected, violence, threats of violence, and those types of things, is there an incentive in these communities to continue to foment this type of attitude? And is that leading to the growing danger and the growing threat across our country?
I think it's a general threat estimate. We could say that a lot of the organized public violence that we've seen in the last half decade is what we would call top-down. Right? It's not like the civil rights movement. It's not like people saying, let's block the bridge in Montgomery, Alabama. It's people being organized and sent to the streets. And we're seeing the same people or the same groups organizing across a range of different issues. So if you say, is there an external threat of a button to push to say, when do we want to create public discord in the United States and make that happen? We've seen a series of occasions now where there appears the answer to that is yes. And then, as I said, the real question is, because we're worried about public safety, if that crosses over into material support. Now you just don't have somebody that's fomenting public unrest for political motives, for international motives, but you might have people that are actually creating a physical threat to American citizens.
Ms. Raymond, you talked about having both sides of the ideological spectrum covered, that doesn't matter, that you see it on both sides, but characterize those that are committing these, that are inciting these violent protests right now. What side of the political spectrum are they on? The ones that are screaming from the river to the sea and free Palestine in a way that incites violence and protest?
Certainly what's been, I think, most jarring for many in the Jewish community over the past few weeks has been the shift from what we had seen as sort of peaceful but uncomfortable protest to violent protest. There's no question about that.
Which side of the political spectrum do they lie on?
They're coming from the far left. And according to our survey, I didn't give this statistic before, we ask American Jews, where are you most concerned about the threats? And 33% say the far left, 33% say the far right, 33% say Christian nationalism, and 33% say extremism in the name of Islam.
What I want to hone in on right now, though, is these protests have been going on for quite some time, for several years, in fact, and they've become more violent in nature. So do you see that same character in that 33% that you just identified on the far right in the terms of massive amounts of people in massive protests that go from peaceful to violent?
The really tragic part of what we are seeing in anti-Semitism in America today is that we cannot look in only one direction. Right now, it would be very easy to turn all of our attention to the far left, to the anti-Zionist protesters, and say, this is where the threat is coming from now, and ignore every other source of anti-Semitism. We cannot do that. We don't have that luxury.
I agree. Thank you. My time has expired. I yield to the ranking member.
Thank you. And on that point, I mean, I think it is important that we call out anti-Semitism wherever it exists and that we act to prevent violence, whatever the motivation. And, that is certainly true when protests turn violent on the far left. It's also true, for example, in Charlottesville, a mass protest that turned violent, replete with chants of Jews will not replace us, among other inappropriate and incendiary slogans. So we got to call it all out. But one of the dynamics that I find here, and this has not been the case, I want to thank the chairman for a very good conversation and for calling this hearing. I want to thank all of the witnesses for bringing, I think, good, actionable recommendations. But I think one of the things that frustrates some of us, particularly, those who are Jewish members of Congress or who, like myself, don't practice but have Jewish heritage, is sometimes, we feel that anti-Semitism is being used to justify whatever the political agenda is that someone is trying to push. When really what we need to be doing right now is listening to the Jewish community in this moment of crisis, and asking the Jewish community in America, what do you need? So in that vein, hearing recommendations from these panelists is very instructive, and I want to make sure that those recommendations are the center of what we take away from this. Recommendations like fully funding the nonprofit security grant program and getting the nearly $500 million that has already been allocated out the door to organizations that need it. Funding and supporting the CP3 program so that we can prevent radicalization before it occurs. That is a recommendation that is actionable, that we in Congress can have influence over, that we need to support. Another recommendation that I noticed in Mr. Siegel's testimony had to do with the Office of Civil Rights in the Department of Education. And I think particularly in the higher education conversation right now, that's important. So I'd like to offer you a moment, Mr. Siegel, to explain the rationale for that recommendation and why it's important.
Yeah, I mean, we need to kind of attack where we are seeing anti-Semitism, and I will say it's not only on college campuses. We're seeing it, throughout our society. We're seeing it online. We're seeing it at the mouths of some of our leaders. But I think, when you think about ways to try to attack this issue before it gets worse, finding ways to deal with it when people are younger and giving them alternatives is going to help prevent future issues of anti-Semitism. And I would just like to say, the attacks of tomorrow are being incubated today, whether it's in online spaces, whether it is in people feeling emboldened to harass their Jewish classmates, et cetera. And so the education department being able to focus on Title VI, for example, cases, hopefully will help.
That's incredibly important. I agree. And again, just for the record, I stated this earlier, so far this year, the administration has cut at least 240 employees from that office at a time when we should be surging resources. The way to deal with anti-Semitism on campuses is by having strong Title VI enforcement, by having the Department of Education exercise oversight, not by cutting funding to medical research, not by turning away the best and the brightest from around the world who want to study in the United States. So again, I just want to make sure that we are listening to what our expert witnesses here are asking us for as a Congress, and that the administration is listening as well. Look, I do retain optimism. I believe that we can get past this period of divisiveness and hate that we're living in, and we can build a brighter and better future, but we need to put the resources in the right places. Support DHS, support law enforcement, support the people who are doing the work of enforcing Title VI, do the actual work, put the funding where it belongs. This is not a time to be pulling back. And yes, going after hate online is absolutely essential. And I'll just end on this. The social media platforms will pretend that they are neutral conduits for speech. But when their algorithms amplify certain kinds of content that promotes violence, content that promotes hate, when their algorithms do that, they are not being neutral. The algorithms are not neutral on those platforms, and therefore they have a responsibility to exercise their power responsibly. If they don't, then Congress has a role to step in. So thank you all again. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for the second round of questioning. This was something that had come up in the first round, and what I'll probably do is I'll frame the question and then we'll go down the line and just hear each of your thoughts on it. As a cop, you get to learn all sorts of fun case law, and in this particular case, Brandenburg v. Ohio from 1969 is the current governing SCOTUS case around where does free speech end and where does criminal action begin. And so just for the sake of framing this, I'll read you a quick synopsis of it, which is that speech may not be forbidden, advocating the use of force or unlawful conduct, unless that advocacy is directed to inciting or producing imminent lawless action, or is likely to incite or produce such lawless action. And so it goes back to the old hypothetical, is it allowed to yell fire in a crowded theater? Well, that depends. Is there actually fire in a crowded theater? Then yes, you should absolutely yell fire in a crowded theater. But if you yell those exact same words with the intention of sowing discord, causing lawlessness, somebody gets hurt in a chaotic evacuation and you knew there was no fire, you did it out of malicious intent, well then of course that's not protected speech. And so in the case of the discussion that we're having here, just like to go down the line, starting with Mr. Sleeper, and hear your thoughts around some of the slogans that we're hearing. Free Palestine, the river to the sea, and help break down the things that you're looking for that would help to define that line between something protected by free speech or something that is, as it says here in Brandenburg v. Ohio, calling for imminent lawless action or likely to incite that imminent lawless action. We got 3.5 minutes left.
Thank you, sir. Our analysts are trained and managed to a privacy policy. We have a very rigorous privacy policy at SCN. We are specifically looking for individuals online who are making violent threats to the Jewish community. Not threats, not comments about the Jewish community, but threats to life. And clearly that meets the exemption policy in the First Amendment. Real threats are an exemption. Attempts to intimidate and create fear are an exemption. So that's exactly what we're doing in the sense of staying true to to the Constitution and the First Amendment for still being effective in identifying individuals
Okay,
intent upon threatening the Jewish community.
thank you. Mr. Segal?
Yeah, I would just say quickly, there are two elements that we look at. One is, there is completely protected speech that can still be very damaging, not because it's immediate, but this is a slow boil. And the more that you dehumanize Jews and Israelis over time, the more that you normalize the type of language that isolates them and encourages people to try to attack them, the more likely it is possible. So it doesn't mean the speech is illegal, but it means we still need to do something about that and find some counteractions. The second part, real quick, online spaces where a lot of these discussions are starting and that animate what we're seeing in the real world include terrorist organizations being able to share their propaganda, their communiques with a whole host of people around the globe. That may be a space, like on Telegram, to interrupt some of the language that we know is not only by foreign terrorist organizations, but actually is animating that violence. So I'd like to find a way, and I would like to work with any leaders here to find a way to drive a wedge in that space.
Thank you. Dr. Carafano?
Now, the reason why I focus on material support is because it's an action that we absolutely know stops terrorists and public violence. And as you pointed out in that legal opinion, there is a bright line there. It is not a free speech issue, period. Can I just make a very quick comment on your last question, which was on the information sharing in state and local? Because if a 287G program had been in place in Boulder, Colorado, it is very likely that that perpetrator would have been found and removed from the country. There was only actually, I think, one 287G program. It was in Teller County. It was actually invalidated by the courts because it violated state law.
Yeah, it was invalidated by state law directly in 2023 because I debated that state law in the state legislature. Thank you. We got 34 seconds left. Ms. Raymond.
I'll be very speedy. I want to echo what Oren said about whether it's permissible or not. We have a responsibility to push back against language and rhetoric that when it seeps into the consciousness of even some, if not all, can be dangerous, and flag for the subcommittee a resource from AJC called Translate Hate that is a visual glossary of anti-Semitic terms and tropes that sometimes hide in plain sight. It talks about when they are and when they may not be anti-Semitic, and it includes terms like from the river to the sea, globalize the Intifada. Happy to provide this and any other resources after the hearing today.
Thank you. Yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Goldman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As the co-chair of the bipartisan House Anti-Semitism Task Force, I think a lot about how to address anti-Semitism. And I think one of the most important ways not to address anti-Semitism is to make it partisan and to try to place more relative blame on one party or another party for anti-Semitism. I will say, as a member of the Democratic Party, that those people who espouse rhetoric that from the river to the sea, globalize the Intifada, also in many cases are anti-American and anti-democratic. They are not part of the Democratic Party. They are extremists. I don't know if they're part of any political party, but I and many of my colleagues disavow them. They're not part of our party. If you are anti-American and anti-democratic, then you are not part of any party. And I hope we can stop trying to place more blame on one or the other and use it for partisan gain or political points. Mr. Siegel, I want to go back to, I think, what's a really, really important area to discuss, one that I've been focused on for quite a while, and that is the rise of anti-Semitic rhetoric and terrorist action or terrorist conduct and rhetoric on social media. Starting in November of 2023, I wrote 3 different letters ultimately to Speaker Johnson asking for an investigation of X because X had been promoting terrorists on its platform, notwithstanding its rules and conditions. Now, Meta has followed X and has decided not to have any content moderation. And according to a recent Tech Transparency Project report, you can search for and collate pages and pages for the Islamic State, for Al-Qaeda, that are automatically generated by Facebook when you just list that terrorist group or you check into a terrorist group. Now, Facebook says that it bans Islamic State and Al-Qaeda and says that its technology is specially trained to detect them, but that's flatly not the case. TikTok, of course, has been well documented to be promoting anti-Semitic rhetoric, anti-Semitic speech, and supporting terrorist organizations that preach anti-Semitism and anti-Israel beliefs. And this is what has radicalized the three recent perpetrators of violence. They have been radicalized online. And I think your point about figuring out how to put a wedge in the social media platforms to prevent the proliferation and the promotion of that content is essential to combating anti-Semitism. I'm very interested in working with you. I urge the chairman to pick this up because I think that if we do want to address anti-Semitism, we have to tackle it online, because that is unquestionably where people are radicalized right now. And I guess in the last minute or so, if you could just describe some suggestions and recommendations for actions that we could take to do that, I'd be grateful.
Thank you for the question, and we would be delighted to work with your staff on ways to move this forward. I think the big point here is it's not just the presence of anti-Semitism on these platforms, it's the ability for these platforms to amplify it and for anti-Semites to actually monetize those products because of their anti-Semitism, right? I mean, that is even beyond just merely having it show up. And so we need stronger trust and safety parts of these organizations, which have been decimated by some of them. We need to make sure that there are teams that are actually, whether it's using automated technologies or human beings, like they need to enforce their terms of services, right? I mean, they're ready.
It's that simple, right? They have the regulations, they have the restrictions, they're just not enforcing them.
Right, and ADL, for example, we have a hate symbols database. We have all sorts of information that if someone's really looking for anti-Semitism and hate, all they have to do is train their algorithms on what we provide, which is publicly available, to identify that hate and then make a dent into those types of exploitation of their platforms by anti-Semites. But there needs to be a willingness there. They need to want to put people over profits. And frankly, if they're not going to do it on their own, I think government needs to step in and provide an opportunity.
And Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the extra time, and I really sincerely hope that we can tackle this issue because it's incredibly important on the issue of counterterrorism and anti-Semitism. Thank you for the extra time.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman, Ms. Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to our ranking member, Magaziner, for holding this very important hearing today. Let me just begin by indicating that clearly the rise of the anti-Semitism in the United States and across the world is alarming, especially after the October 7th terrorist attack. The anti-Semitism attacks have increased exponentially. No one should feel threatened or scared because of who they are. And we must call out anti-Semitism each and every time that it rears its ugly head. Today, I want to point out, though, that President Trump and his administration has cut vital federal programs, funding, and programs that are key in fighting against anti-Semitism. These freezes and cuts must be reversed immediately. It's something I've actually spoken about here in this very committee. My first question, what I'd like to direct it to Deputy Director Sleeper, let me just make reference to the fact that these non-profit security grants is a critical federal resource that helps organizations at a high risk of terrorism and other extremist attacks improve their physical security and prepare for the myriad threats they face for synagogues, mosques, churches, schools, and community centers. This program is not only is not the only medium to obtain the protections that they need to keep their community safe. Unfortunately, as I pointed out, to date, the administration has not released any notice of funding opportunity for the fiscal year 2025 or conducted its usual public webinar to help potential applicants understand the grant application process. Nearly a month ago, right here in this room, I pressed Secretary Noem on when our communities would receive guidance on this critical funding. Unfortunately, she did not give me an answer, and here we are today, still waiting, by the way. So with that, Deputy Director, how are the delays in receiving the notice of funding opportunities, along with the absence of public-facing guidance like the webinar, impacting the ability of vulnerable organizations and groups to access resources necessary to protect their communities?
Thank you. The nonprofit security grant has and should continue to be an essential component of a comprehensive security strategy to secure Jewish facilities.
Well, thank you. We obviously know that, but unfortunately, I just want to stress the fact that that is still ongoing and not released, and that is something that we're all advocating for, but unfortunately, that is still something that has not happened. We also recognize that homegrown, violent extremists and domestic terrorists prey on our Jewish community. This is why our New Jersey Office of Homeland Security identified attacks from these groups as the highest threat to New Jersey. But inexplicitly, the Trump administration is redirecting counterterrorism personnel and funds that should be used to fight homegrown domestic terrorism. For example, the FBI field offices across the country has been ordered to reassign agents away from our counterterrorism and counterintelligence. Recent anti-Semitic attacks at the Capitol Jewish Museum in Washington, D.C., and in Boulder, Colorado, underscore the urgent need to double down on efforts to combat domestic terrorism and simply not walk away from them. So with that said, Mr. Siegel, how does redirecting, once again, the federal resources from the homegrown extremists and domestic terrorists affects the safety and security of the Jewish community?
It affects the safety and security of the Jewish community. We need to seize this moment now when the Jewish community is in a crisis of violence and anti-Semitic incidents targeting the Jewish community to make sure that we are using every opportunity to uplift, invest in, not contract, funding in those entities that will help protect the Jewish community.
So I know I have 5 seconds, but let me just say, I hope that you are sharing that thought and making that statement to the front office, the White House, so that these funds can do exactly what you're talking about and advocating, making sure to protect that, because that is not happening.
The gentlelady.
I yield back,
Fired,
Mr.
and
Chairman. Thank you so very much.
I'm sorry for mispronouncing your name, Mrs. Poe, earlier. I'll now recognize the ranking member for a very brief closing statement, and I'll follow as well.
So again, I want to thank the chairman for calling a hearing on this absolutely essential topic. Thank our witnesses for doing an excellent job today and coming, I think, with a very thoughtful and also productive approach to this hearing and giving us some good recommendations that we should absolutely consider and act on. Look, a lot's been said already. I'll just say it again. I think both in Congress and from the administration, when it comes to combating violent anti-Semitism, we need not just rhetoric, but also resources. That is important, and it cannot be overstated. So I'm going to continue to fight for those resources. I hope and I expect that we'll have bipartisan support in that effort, and that we will all continue to find the inspiration to call out anti-Semitic hate wherever it exists, that we will continue to work together to meet this moment that we're in, and combat the culture of hate that unfortunately has taken root across much of our society. I'll end. I open by referencing President Washington's visit to the Touro Synagogue in Newport, Rhode Island. It was an important signal 235 years ago from our first president that he wanted our country to be a place that was welcoming to all faiths, and particularly the Jewish faith. And the building still stands. If you ever find yourselves in Rhode Island, I encourage you to visit it. It's quite moving and inspirational. In advance of his visit, he wrote a letter to the congregation that I'll quote from and end from now, and hopefully his words can inspire us as it inspired Americans in his time. He wrote, quote, "May the children of the stock of Abraham who dwell in this land continue to merit and enjoy the goodwill of the other inhabitants, while everyone shall sit in safety under his own vine and fig tree, and there shall be none to make him afraid. May the Father of all mercies scatter light and not darkness in our paths, and make all of us in our vocations useful here, and in his own due time and way everlastingly happy." And with that, I'll yield back.
I thank the ranking member. I think our witnesses agree with the ranking member on the thoughtful dialogue today with recommendations that are very helpful. And I'll note as an observation that there is a movement in our country to stifle free speech. It's real. It is happening in many different places. It's happening in universities. It's happening, in fact, in the last administration with the thought of a disinformation board to be run by this department, the Homeland Security Department. A horrible idea. And so we balance the safety and security of our citizens with free speech. And this is a hard thing. And the testimony that we've heard from each of you has been very helpful to balance that. And when protected speech turns into violence, when it turns into the threat of violence, when it turns into the inciting of violence, is where we cross over that threshold. And we will struggle with that here. I'm very glad to hear my colleague from New York talk about those who have made horribly, not just insensitive, but false and violent statements from one party or another. In the case, I believe that my colleague from New York was referring to those in his own party. And we do need to call out those who are making egregious and what can be referred to as inciting violent type of statements. I don't think it's just funding. I do think we need funding, but it's not just funding. It's policy. It's a willingness. It's the political will to stand up to an anti-Semitic mindset that unfortunately has permeated our society. It's a willingness to prosecute in places that are not upholding law and order. And whether it's an anti-ICE protest that turns violent or it's an anti-Semitic protest that turns violent, it's an unwillingness to prosecute those that is way more important than any sort of funding could ever be. And I think we know this because not a single law changed, not a single amount of funding changed, and the border immediately became secure. So yes, we will work on funding where we need it. And I agree with the ranking member that where we can put good resources to use, we will. But what I'd really like to call on is, and if this is equally across the spectrum a problem, as has been testified to today, which I'm not sure that I believe that, but if it is, then I hope that we will be able to call it out, because right now we do see an ideology that has permeated in a far left mentality that has attracted thousands of people. And I hope that I can count on the ranking member to call that out. And if and when we find out that there is an ideology that is associated with the other side, that we can do the same. I think the safety and security of the Jewish community has been threatened. I'm glad that we're holding this hearing to figure out some of the facts with more research to be done to understand where legislation can be helpful and what we need to do to take the next steps, because this isn't a bipartisan issue, this is a nonpartisan issue. It's not just the Jewish community, it's every community that could be targeted in one way or another. And we 100% have to recognize that. But right now, it is the Jewish community that's being targeted, and that's unacceptable. So I thank the ranking member and the members who joined this hearing. I thank our witnesses and commit to continuing to combat this and continuing to find good solutions. I want to acknowledge and say to the members of the subcommittee that if you have additional questions for the witnesses, we would ask the witnesses to respond to those in writing pursuant to our committee rules 7E. The hearing record will be open for the next 10 days, and without objection, this subcommittee stands adjourned.